Joining me now to give his take on those themes is Peter Andersen, founder and portfolio manager at Andersen Capital Management. Well, Peter, thank you very much for joining us. 75 or 100 basis points. What are your expectations for this week's FOMC? And what do you think Jerome Powell is going to have to say about the future trajectory of rates and the economy in general?
Well, I think that most of us are expecting 75 basis points. I think 100 basis points would be a stretch, but that's also symptomatic of the great fear that is out there. You know, a narrative can get its own momentum. And as we've seen over the past 2 weeks, no one ever had thought before that of a 100 basis point hike, but now that is being talked about, isn't it? So that gives you a sense of how totally sensitive the market is right now. And one thing I'm hoping that the Fed will say, but I don't think it's actually going to happen, is if the Fed in their narrative could simply make some reference to the fact that in some areas, inflation is naturally receding. That would go a long way to give investors a sense of balance. You know, there's a lot of talk out there now that the Fed is so singularly focused on raising rates that no data would change their mind. And I think it's very psychologically important for investors to hear the Fed demonstrate that they aren't like that they have a balanced outlook and a balanced set of tools and a mentality, so that if they were to just make a slight reference to that, I think that would go a long way in giving us confidence that the Fed actually knows what it's doing.
Well, then that brings me on to my next point. Do you share the view that some other investors have that the Fed risks overdoing it and therefore plunging the US economy into a recession?
Well, you know, we can simply look at on our way to this place that we got to. We're looking back and saying the Fed has made mistakes. You know, it's a very, very difficult job that they had during COVID. And I don't blame them because there is really no roadmap. It was totally a new type of situation, a global situation. I know the Fed has the best intentions, but reviewing them in a report card, I think we would all say that they were too slow to act. So one has to rationalize, have they learned anything from that period? And if so, are they going to incorporate that into this phase? And I think most of us are fearful that they haven't really learned anything new, and that there is a likelihood that they will make the same type of complementary mistake, raising rates. So I am in that camp. I'm worried that the Fed will raise too quickly. And remember, we were at zero, virtually zero, at the beginning of this year. This has been a very, very sharp increase. And of course, we have to honor the unintended consequences of all this. Nobody really knows how this is going to play out. And so that has me concerned, yes.
Well, I'm going to ask you then, what is your prediction for the outlook for the next 6 to 12 months, if you can? And how do you think we'll play into the share market?
Well, you know, growth stocks and risk assets have really been tremendously under pressure. I mean, I would say even more so since I've lived through 2008 and in 2000, the telecom bubble. So this is really a very stressful period for a lot of investors. And the way I counsel investors, I say to them, if you have a longer horizon than 6 months, because I do think within 6 months, we will have reached some stability point, and hopefully the Fed will come out and say, our campaign is suspended for now. There's been enough demonstrated data that inflation has eased, and for now we're going to sit on the sidelines. That would give a tremendous boost to all assets, especially risk assets. And so that's what I'm thinking will happen. It might be 2 quarters from now. But I urge investors that are holding risk assets, if they don't need to stay on with those assets, because I do think they will come back sharply.
Let's turn to cryptocurrencies and crypto shares. They've been under heavy pressure again today. Do the latest regulatory threats undermine the attraction of those even more?
I do think so. You know, I think crypto is a complicated topic to discuss. it is in an evolutionary phase. You know, this rolling disclosure for people that support that as an asset class. If you recall, first it was supposed to be an inflation hedge. That didn't work. So there was a pivot now to it's something else as an asset class. And I do think that it is such a young, if you want to call it an asset class, that people do not totally understand it. They don't know how it fits into a portfolio. There is a lot of hype about that as an asset class. And I am on the negative side of that. I do believe that while the mathematics of blockchain is an interesting, call it a sandbox for mathematicians, I don't know if it actually can be a viable currency that every person in a country can understand it as simply as, say, the US dollar, for instance.
Well, Peter Andersen, thank you very much, founder and portfolio manager at Andersen Capital Management. Thanks again for your input today. Well, that is Trading at Noon. You can watch more videos on Reuters.com. I'm Oliver Regan, and this is Reuters.